I would like to start with a, let's say, more strategic, overview, because I also see that we have very different stakeholder groups. We have hospitals, we do have pharma, but also we have other groups as well to make it applicable. And then I will share, to come to your point, some use cases going into that direction. To start with, and I think we have seen it in other presentations as well, we're facing an increasing complexity driven by exponential growth. You all are aware of Moore's law, and I love to always remind myself when I was going to a media market here in Germany, purchasing a USB stick with 128 megabytes for around about 50 or 60 euros, which is now costing a fraction. Well, this is the outcome of what we see here in this nice graph. And over the last years, we also saw that there is an exponential growth of technology. And in our brains, as we all know, we are not able to think exponentially. We think linear, and there was the COVID example. We thought about infection curves in a linear way. And this makes it very hard for us as humans to imagine what is expected to come over the next years. Concretely, Gen AI and agentic were even trends we couldn't envision, I think, in the last 5 years, but now they are there. And the question is, what can we do with that, and how do we, as organizations, I will of course provide a perspective on pharma, but how can we prepare to shape this and also to get the most out of the trends we see here? An interesting study I want to start with. It has been published by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was actually in July 2025 this year. And it says that 95% of Gen AI projects do not capture any value. And I found this quite interesting, because I was expecting that, looking at LinkedIn and all the interesting posts on what Gen AI is doing, that it should be more than 0%. Apparently, there is a scale gap. So you do a lot of pilots, but it's not reaching the maximum scale and the maximum impact. There is a bias in terms of over-investing into commercial functions, because they're very close to operations and to customers, but not looking into, for example, back-end activities such as shared services, or where you have a high level of centralization and high level of activities where you can, for example, have generative AI supporting, whether it's in finance or in manufacturing or in other areas, the processes. And last but not least, what the study has been telling us is that there is higher return when you have a partner. I think it goes back to historical discussions on make or buy. What is the right, or what is the sweet spot basically for the respective strategy you do have? So from a Sanofi perspective, I think there are some examples where I could also, let's say, confirm that in some areas we had to move from a, let's say, pure pilot approach and really choose our battles, if we may call it like this, use them, start with an MVP, and then scale it from there. I will come to concrete examples rather at the end of the presentation, but for now I want to move the concept a bit further, because the MIT even did a further study, which was around about 6 to 7 years ago. So before we started with all the trends on generative AI, but I think it's still very applicable. And what they did is they looked into several companies across different industry sectors, and they clustered it into 2 dimensions. Into the vertical axis, which is actually the level of technological intensity. So how quick am I as an organization adapting new technologies? And the horizontal axis, which is the level of transformation management. So actually what I'm doing in my role, to understand how is technology supporting your strategy? What are the right use cases to pick, and how do we solve actually business problems? And what is, for example, change management we should do or not do in some areas to support people to be augmented? In short, if you group those companies into those 4 clusters, what you will find out is that specifically the fashionistas, so the ones who are actually very quick in adopting new technologies, but may lack a certain level of strategy and structure, do, comparably to the others, have higher sales. However, they are lacking profitability and market share. So it means that they may have to compensate for their high and quick investment into new tech with doing, for example, the data foundations afterwards, or understanding that there is a garbage in, garbage out, let's say, problem they have to face, and therefore they have to do the investments basically afterwards, which is, let's say, not very supportive then also from the market evaluation and the capital markets to understand this. Then when we look into conservatives, they tend to have less revenues than the others, but they are improved in, let's say, profitability or market share, meaning concretely, they do proper work, they do the foundations well, they look into what are the product or the areas we need to invest in. Do we have the foundations in place? Do we have the infrastructure? Do we have a modular tech stack? Do we even have data mesh? Maybe they take a bit longer, but in the end, they are superior in terms of profitability. And of course, it goes without saying that when you're, let's say, the digital expert in that cluster, you're better than the others in general. Considering the learnings so I've been had in Sanofi over the last years, and concretely scaling robotics process automation, intelligent automation, process mining, deploying AI in commercials, so it's around field force enablement, marketing teams, and even right now when we use generative AI for content creation that we're using in, for example, congresses or in direct-to-patient engagement in the US. There are also a couple of learnings that I could echo, which is very synchronized to what the Stanford School of Business is saying, that organizations do follow when they are superior than others. It's first, organizations outperform others when they have access to digital talent. And there is a great example, because when I was attending the OMR, it's the Online Marketing Rockstar event in Hamburg, it's the biggest digital marketing event in Germany. I was curious to understand what the prompt engineer is about. This was around about 2 to 3 years. And also to understand that the data scientist, who used to be one of the most admired roles 5 years ago, is now being outperformed by the data engineer. So this is something which I found very interesting, that digital talent is something which is continuously evolving, and you will find this in reports such as the World Economic Forum, which is releasing the Future of Jobs report on an annual basis. We talked about technology architecture, and it's very consistent with what Roberta has been sharing, and you may feel that there are very similar key success factors here. Then, of course, it's about the vision, the strategy to connect the use cases with your overarching goal. There is culture. Nimble organizational structures means that you have certain agility to move with the high level of empowerment. And I saw today in the morning a presentation, I think it was on the hospital in the Netherlands, where empowerment and agility is being used in terms of making technology human. So if we map this with my previous concept, you will find that it's more about transformation than technology. And I found this very interesting, because we always speak so much around tech. Everyone speaks about tech, but to make tech human or to make it work, and you made the example with the email, with using Copilot. Obviously, there are two parts to this. And I'm not sending every email using Copilot, obviously, but it's both, and it's complementary. So the learnings for Sanofi, so what I can share so far, and I will use the same examples. I will use the technology intensity, and then I will come to the transformation management, is that when it comes to tech, the technology itself is not always the problem. What you will face is that the data foundations is fundamental. And data foundations mean data governance, data quality, and those are not the, let's say, most admired topics, because it requires a lot of organizational resilience and structure to put this into place, and there is no shortcut. So you can use your infrastructure, you can use APIs to use certain LLMs, and you can try to ingest it into your processes. But if the data you have internally, whether it's around your own processes, whether it's around customer data or patient data, and you then apply certain models, the accuracy will not be as good. So you need to fix your data foundations. And this needs to be complementary with the right tech strategy in terms of modular, interoperable, and data mesh, where you have this ability to scale it up. And you made the example from moving to the cloud, but I think you need to go beyond that, because different countries have different, let's say, frameworks, and this needs to be also, let's say, mirrored in the way you deploy your tech. And last but not least, when it comes to concrete use cases in terms of generative AI or AI in general, make or buy is something you need to always have in mind. because doing something by yourself is very costly. It may be appealing at the start, but the question is, how long will it take until the next technology has been, let's say, innovating and will outperform what you just have been built? Speaking about exponential growth. From a transformation perspective, there are also several learnings we have been seeing. Is that first, use case-led approach is very critical and very important. So when we scaled our AI to augment our field and marketing teams, that, for example, a sales representative gets recommendations on his iPad, what is the best mix of channels he should use in the interactions with healthcare professionals, or if our marketing teams they have a better understanding on how they could segment different kinds of HCPs. This was only possible because we started with a more use case-based approach. We wanted to solve the business problems and not just deploying, let's say, a pure tech and then understanding or trying to understand how does it now fit to the needs we do have and waiting for the outcomes to come. Then the second two learnings is that turning affected people into participants, it's very strong, let's say, approach, and it will help from the design of the use case, basically understanding how does a certain technology can help you to solve a problem towards then scaling it further globally, and then having also the buy-in from the change management perspective. And last but not least, I think it goes without saying is that the user-centric approach, whether we speak around internally generated, let's say, ChatGPT or LLMs, to other AI solutions, is always something we should come from the end user, whether it's a customer, a patient, or an internal colleague. So concretely, from a use case perspective, where we balanced both dimensions well, and I will show you some here, is that in the commercial space, and this is just a snapshot, for example, we were trying to solve the problem that the healthcare professionals were basically confronted with many different visits of sales representatives, and sometimes based on the therapeutic area. So when we speak about diabetes or cardio and even vaccines, where you're visiting general practitioners, it wasn't actually very clear and aligned, and the GP was receiving multiple visits from a company by different sales reps, and it didn't feel actually like a good experience. So it is not, let's say, a very fancy AI we have been using, but in the end, what we try to understand is how can we optimize the plan of interactions and the plan of channels. So whether you use, for example, digital interactions with certain customers on HCPs, or whether you go to a face-to-face interaction, and we use the AI to better nudge our representatives and gave them recommendations on a weekly basis whom to visit and at what time. So it's what we call a next best interaction or next best action model. What was key is that we started with the field reps and with the sales representatives from the start. So we didn't push it top down. The second example is, and it's right now what we're scaling, is that in pharma we do spend a lot of money on materials. So we do create a lot of materials on new products, on new launches, on everything which is being used in congresses. And agencies do help us a lot to do that. And there is obviously, with generative AI, a lot of potential how we can do it quicker. And by doing it quicker, empowering also the marketeers, doing it by themselves. So we give them the tools that they can prompt their campaigns, and then saving some money even. And this is something where we started in some markets. So for example, in the US, started with an external solution, but then internalized it to a certain extent, and gave the marketeers the tools to prompt their own content for their campaigns or for their emails, or whether it's social media. Of course, we needed to provide some guardrails because there are some restrictions, and this differs from market to market. But it was a good way how we, let's say, democratized the use of generative AI, and by doing that, even improved our cost footprint and reducing our spend with agencies. Another very, very nice example that we have in the scope I'm currently working in is market research, to understand what are the needs of healthcare professionals, and making these insights more actionable and easier accessible for marketing and sales teams and medical teams. Concretely, In pharma, we do a lot of research. So we partner with many different external vendors to understand what are the needs for healthcare professionals, what are reasons to go with a certain vaccine or not, and why would someone not do a vaccination? What are process barriers in hospitals for doing an RSV examination, because there are many different babies. You have the U1, U2 examination, who is doing what? All those kind of questions. And then we have different drugs, obviously. So how do we then make those insights very centric in terms of that the user gets the answer to the question he currently has, whether he's working in diabetes, cardio, or in any other area. And thereby we used an external solution, like it's an AI solution, which is specialized for answering those kind of research questions. It's based on a private cloud instance, and we trained this kind of AI with our internal reports, or the reports we get from our external partners. And now it's being scaled very quickly across all our therapeutical areas and brands. So I, as a marketeer, as a medical, basically can just prompt any kind of questions I have for if it's around diabetes or a vaccine, and I better understand, okay, what are the barriers in Germany to do a flu vaccination? Why would general practitioner not are willing to do, let's say, vaccination? Is it that the processes are not in place in the office? Is it that there needs to be stronger study data, so that we can use this basically to support, for example, also from a process perspective, to do, let's say, to prepare a campaign, for example. And last but not least, this is not from a pharma scope in general. This is more industry agnostic. Where we have balanced the transformation and the technology aspect is that in shared services, you may know there's a lot of finance activities to do your annual bookkeeping, or in HR there are a lot of recurring activities to hire, retire, onboard new colleagues. And what we did there is we created first a center of excellence for automation, and then in all the different countries we created a community and a network of community of automation ambassadors. And we used this, and of course we had technologies such as process mining and robotics, AI automations, and so on. But it was more the user-centric approach which helped us to understand what are the areas where we need to help our employees in HR and finance to leverage and scale automation. I would like to conclude with a couple of remarks that, and I hope it was clear in my presentation, that I was always trying to combine both dimensions, which is on the one hand the tech and the transformation approach. That first, AI is a mirror of humanity. Then second, the USP we had and we as human always, let's say, used to live, is the ability to think, to be knowledgeable, and to be basically renowned for our hard skills. And we also know that almost 80% of economies are based on hard skills. With the evolution of AI, this can become a commodity. And then the question is, what are we bringing as an added value, and also what role do we play? And here, soft skills concretely, and becoming more human with AI, I think this is one of the key areas where we can double down on. And when we do this well, we actually combine our efforts when it comes to transformation, that we focus a lot on the people-centric parts, because the technology is anyhow going to evolve. So now I'm happy to get your questions, since I did not go too much into the details of use cases, but I wanted to do it as, let's say, industry or function agnostic to inspire a little bit the thinking.